So Jamie and I have worked together in Adobe some years ago, and we worked together for almost 5, 6 years, close to 6 years. And Jamie's been with Adobe for almost 12 years. And
Over
in all
12.
these years, sorry?
Over 12.
Over 12 years, oh, okay, right.
I want all the credit.
So Jamie, could you just tell us a little about your journey? So I think that's the best thing to start with, maybe.
Yeah, so I started at Adobe back in 2004. Before Adobe, I was at a little company called Ariba, which I think that there is an Ariba office here in Bangalore, maybe in Delhi. I've met a couple of designers from there. Prior to that, I was in a couple of design agencies, but the majority of my career has been at Adobe, leading various design teams, starting with our consumer offerings, which was Photoshop Elements and Premiere Elements at the time. And then I managed the Creative Suite before we had the Creative Cloud. And now I manage the entire team.
So Jamie, let me start by asking you this question. I think Adobe, when we look at Adobe products, they've been around for almost like several generations, kind of, and 25, 30 years. Companies don't last that long. Startups sometimes don't last as long as a product might in Adobe thing. Very intertwined with the history of design per se, if you think of Photoshop or Illustrator and all of that. How does Adobe manage to keep itself fresh, many of these products fresh, refreshed, recreate? What's the secret sauce there to be ageless?
Maybe I'll show a couple of slides and talk a little bit about the team, the makeup of the team, our charter, and then I can talk a little bit more about reimagining. So at Adobe, we have about 250 designers, 50 of which are here in Bangalore and in Noida in Delhi. And this is our charter. So we provide design-led innovation. We like to call ourselves a team of makers because that's what we do. We make things. And we fight for the customer, we collaborate, and we disrupt. We reward risk-taking. As designers, it's very important to sort of put yourself out there and take risks with the design work that you're doing. And innovation is our job. Sorry, the font is all crazy because...
Font isn't there?
Adobe, it's on that computer. So
right, Adobe Clean isn't there.
That's why it looks crazy. Right. So don't judge. Don't take too many pictures and tweeting of this. So the team is made up of designers, researchers, writers, architects, artists, anthropologists, and technologists. So in our design team at Adobe, we are very cross-functional, and we leverage all of the different disciplines within our team. So we don't just identify as designers, we identify, and we don't all come from traditional design backgrounds. The majority might, but we do come from all walks of life. And this is at Adobe. These are our sort of 3 pillars of the way in which we look at the work that we do. And this is at the corporate level. So delighting the customer. The customer is always forefront. And I'm hoping as designers working in startups that you're bringing that customer voice into all of the work that you do. Scaling the business. This is very important for designers to understand and have a bit of business acumen, especially those of you working in startups, understanding where your founders are trying to take your products and your whatever you're putting out into the world. Having an understanding of the business really helps you as a designer to design better. And then always innovating and investing in the future. So at Adobe, the work that we do is on 3 different clouds. So this goes into reimagining. Many years ago, we were just a product-oriented company. We had Photoshop, we had Illustrator, we had InDesign, and the way in which Adobe as a company worked was very much about each one of those products in and of themselves. And when Adobe decided that there was a point in time when people would look at Adobe and say, oh, they're old and we we have old products and we're not innovative and we're not innovating. And so our CEO, Shantanu, took a step back and really looked at what do we need to do to bring our company into the future. And that's when we started talking about doing things beyond the products and really looking at cloud and services and mobile. And so we created Document Cloud, Creative Cloud, and Marketing Cloud. So the way in which we look at our experiences is on sort of these three vectors, which is the platform experience. So whenever you're designing a large portfolio of products, it's much easier to build them in a consistent way if you think platform first. So things that you can reuse, things, design patterns, visual language, technology, everything under the hood. So if you think it from a platform perspective, it makes it a lot easier to bring new solutions to the market. Product experience, which is what we do, and then we have an innovation studio. Clicker gone wild. Can you reset it?
Clicker spin.
There we go. Okay, so when we started moving from being sort of product-centric to customer-centric, we started looking at all of the different things that allows a company to become more customer-centric. And so enablement, when we first introduced Creative Cloud into the market, this was sort of a new thing for us because we were becoming a service. And so we had to really start thinking of end-to-end journeys and what does a customer experience in and around the products. So it wasn't just you got a disk and you installed the product. It was you had a different relationship with Adobe at that point because you had to create an account and purchase through the web and download your software through the web. And so making those end-to-end journeys very seamless is something that we continue to work on. It's a very difficult problem, actually. And then the third one on this screen, the cross-cloud value, and this is another part of sort of reimagining Adobe from just products to a service, is really understanding how, from a cloud-based perspective, do we tie everything together and add additional value in that way. So those of you who don't know, this is sort of the breadth of the product portfolio for Adobe. Each one of the mnemonic icons represents either a desktop product, a service, or a mobile application. And so it's divided up into the three clouds, top being Creative Cloud, the middle is the Marketing Cloud, and then the bottom is the Document Cloud. So it's a huge breadth of things. The second line under Creative Cloud, those are all mobile experiences. So there was a point in time when we realized everybody was getting tablets, people were using their phones, they were designing on more surfaces than just the desktop itself. And so we started experimenting with what did it look like to bring creative workflows and creative software to these different types of devices and these different surfaces. So, I don't know, am I answering the question on reimagining?
Oh, that's great. I think one thing you spoke about was around consistency and making the brand system. I think that will be an interesting one. The startups we work with, many of them do struggle with putting a system, a structure together. Uh-huh. And it'll be great to hear from you what's Adobe been doing in this area, because there is obviously design, but technology also involved in the team itself.
Yeah.
So it would be great to hear your perspective on that.
Sure. I mean, this is a great slide to start talking about system. Several years ago, if I were to put all of these solutions up on the screen and show their icon or their mnemonic or their brand, it would look like they all came from different companies. And so when we started looking at consistency, we actually started from the brand and really understanding how do we create a family that looks like it should belong together, And as you can see, it's sort of a color spectrum, and so that's what we call our consistent visual language and design patterns. And what's underneath spectrum is also a shared set of code. And so what we decided that we needed to do when we wanted to have more consistent experiences on all of our surfaces was in the design organization was bring on some technologists that could actually build out the underlying code so that we could hand that off to product teams and they didn't have to do the heavy lifting. So we can look at some of this. That's super tiny type up there, but basically it says exactly what I just said. That Spectrum is a visual language, it's modern, it's clean, it's very crisp. It provides designers parts and pieces to work with. So one of the things that we really try to push for within the design organization at Adobe is that each designer doesn't go and draw their own buttons. If we had 250 designers drawing their own buttons, we would look super crazy. So we provide them these parts and pieces, and that really the problem solving for the designers isn't about the visuals, it's about the workflow, it's about the customer problem, it's about the interaction of the application, and they don't have to worry about drawing all of the parts and pieces. So this is just a few of the surfaces to show what that consistency looks like. They don't all look exactly the same. They are using the same visual elements, but for each application, we want it to feel at home for that user as well. This is a shot of one of the Marketing Cloud services. This is, what is it? Adobe Analytics. This is basically Acrobat or Adobe Document Cloud. This is a web service, Adobe Stock. So again, whether it's on the web or it's on the desktop or it's on the mobile, we want them to feel modern and similar and like that you know that you're in an Adobe application. We have both the light and dark experiences. This is Photoshop. And this is Lightroom. And then this is just and I'll let this scroll through. This is one of the spec sheets. So we provide all of these are like thumbnails and how you would do a card. So all of the specifications for the designers are on a website. They can go and find them. So for those of you that may be the only designer, or maybe there's two designers at your company or at your startup, starting to document your design and your visual language and your patterns in a way that you can share out sort of globally with the people that you work with is a way to sort of evangelize this notion of consistency. And so we always make sure that we have a place where everyone can go and see this. And we named it Spectrum so that people know what to call it. And so again, branding your consistency effort is another way to get it known. And so I'm going to play this video for you. Another thing that we do at Adobe, and again, this is a way to inspire and evangelize the work that we do, is we create sort of inspirational videos that show the work in progress that we can share with people. And so let's just play this. So this is showing Adobe Stock, and we put this together so that we could show to the company how Spectrum brings all of our solutions together across clouds. So we're showing services, we're showing how those services realize through libraries in Photoshop. And then this is showing a sharing workflow through Document Cloud. How that language realizes on a mobile device. Back in Document Cloud for commenting and reviewing. And then this is showing setting up that asset so that it can have analytics behind it so that we can collect data on the performance of that asset and then showing someone looking at what that how it's performing in Marketing Cloud. So again, these are really great ways for designers to show how a product portfolio or a new product can realize, and this is a way to sort of inspire your business partners or your technology partners on the breadth of what the design can be, and so that's what we do.
So that's a great one. I mean, just to sort of add on to that,
Yeah.
how is the team structured because there's so many designers, 250 designers across so many locations, so many time zones, how are the teams or teams structured so that there is a central repository? How does that work? It'd be great to see.
Yeah, so we have a design team that has a design manager and then designers under it for Document Cloud, Creative Cloud, and Marketing Cloud. And then we have a team that we call our cross-cloud team or our platform team. And that team has a set of designers that work on the brand, so that set of mnemonics that I showed you earlier, and all of the components for Spectrum. But the way in which we sort of collaborate on that is the platform team creates sort of the starting point for Spectrum, that the designers that work on the products and know the workflows and understand what new patterns might be, they feed into that pattern library, or if one of the visual elements isn't working that's being provided through Spectrum, they'll provide feedback or they'll provide an alternative. And so it's a very much of a back and forth, but we do have a team who owns that work, and it's their responsibility to sort of be the librarian of that work. In that team, we also have the technologists that I mentioned that are creating the code that underlies all of the parts and pieces.
Great. Coming back to the earlier set of things we were showing in terms of moving from product centricity to customer centricity, how did you see the journey over your career at Adobe?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
So how did you see that evolve? At one point, it was all about a product, and increasingly it has become about customer centricity. So what's the evolution like? Yeah,
so one of the things, I mean, and we're working on this as we speak, and the way in which the design team is organized, how I mentioned in these sort of cloud buckets, which is kind of vertical. So we started from products, so Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, where those were very vertical and sort of worked as their own little companies within Adobe. And then we went to cloud, where we needed to look at each sort of product portfolio in each cloud and say, how do we make those consistent? How do we push that forward? Which was still a vertical way of designing. And today what we're looking at is how do we actually support horizontal design processes, and how do we scale design to look across everything? And so we still need to have designers that are subject matter experts for their product area, but we also need to have designers that think more from a system level and really understand sort of end-to-end workflows and what that journey is for the user. And so we're still working on it, but maybe next year we can come and talk about it more. I mean, I think the biggest problem with it is there are never enough designers to design everything that should be designed. And so how do you get to the point where you are focusing on the hardest problems and providing design leadership there? And then how are you enabling your engineering partners to have parts and pieces like we have in Spectrum, so that if they're going to create something, at least they have a starting ground for it, and at least it will look beautiful, even if maybe the workflow isn't perfect. But that's, I mean, it's a great conversation, scaling design, for sure.
Great. When I joined Adobe, and I'm sure if you look back at your earlier years, products used to ship in 12 months, 18 months cycle. I think increasingly by the time I was leaving Adobe, things were shipping almost on a monthly basis. How has Adobe adapted to this process change? I mean, do you see process change, culture change? If you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we have learned to be much more nimble, and we've learned to really focus on the things that are going to move the needle for Adobe. I think when you were at Adobe, one of the things that helped people sort of move up the career ladder was to go off in a corner and come out with something new and sort of incubate within the larger company and then come out and say, here's a new thing, and then we would try and take that to market. Adobe's not doing that anymore. I think with the breadth of what we need to do from the end-to-end perspective and really focusing on the customer experience across everything that Adobe puts out, has forced the company to really focus on the most important customers and the most important workflows. So it's a really different way of working, especially for Adobe. When you have products like Photoshop and they feel like they are Adobe, and products like Acrobat, where a lot of times when people say Adobe, they're meaning Acrobat Reader. And so to really unify that from a design perspective as well as from a business and technology perspective is a tall order. But things like the Spectrum video that I showed you, the design team uses those things to really show the company how, if we were to focus together, this is what we could be putting out. So,
great. I keep giving the example famously of Adobe where the number of product managers are far less. It's a very tight ship. How does this relationship work within product, design, and engineering? If you could just share a little bit of that.
Yeah, so for the most part, on all of the major products and major services that we are putting out today, there is a deep partnership between the business, both product management, product marketing, engineering, and design. And so for the most part, we don't really start a project unless we have all three legs of that stool present and at the table. And this is something that the design team has fought for a very long time at Adobe, to have their voice at the table at the beginning versus after the strategy has been set or after the product requirements have been defined. And I think that the fact that we're now shipping so continuously, it sort of forced that three legs of the stool to come together a lot sooner. And we've done a really good job at it, to the point that it's very difficult now because we don't have enough designers to be on every single project that is coming up. And so it's, again, a matter of priority.
Lightroom from Adobe was a big one, which kind of changed the way photographers kind of interacted with Photoshop. So it was a very different beast entirely.
Yep.
For those of you who have seen, Acrobat was another one. What are the challenges? What makes those products? What kind of is the force behind it? And how do you go back doing that?
Yeah, so let's see if my Acrobat slide. Oh, this is just showing how people love Adobe. So for Acrobat, so there's a couple of things that we're doing right now. So, and this is back to your first question about reimagining and then just how designers work with product teams. So this is, I believe, Acrobat 10, which would be maybe 4 years old. And this is when we were still shipping software on a 12 to 24-month cycle. And design was really sort of chasing after engineering for the most part and providing icons and not really providing the breadth of sort of customer voice and end-to-end workflow into the process. This next screen represents what we shipped when we introduced Document Cloud, and this was a fully design-driven project. So for this one in particular, because we were moving Acrobat from just a standalone desktop application to an application that ran across surfaces, desktop, web, and mobile, and also introducing the cloud aspect to it. The business leaders actually came to me and said, please focus on this and drive it. So the design process actually really drove how we were approaching the business. And we had an engineering team that was going down one path, and we came in and sort of put a roadblock on that path. And we really led those conversations of reimagining Acrobat into Document Cloud through the design and through narrative. So for this, and I don't have an example of it here, but we do create these presentations that I call a day in the life, and it basically takes key users and we create a narrative, a story of how they would be using this piece of software and what situation they may be in, whether it's in the office or on the train on the way to work. And we really just paint the picture through narrative. And for this one in particular, the narrative that we put together, when we shared that with our CEO, our ops staff level at Adobe, like their eyes just lit up and said, okay, we finally get what you guys are talking about. Prior to that, we were trying to pitch Document Cloud through the business lens, and I know there's some business people here, but the numbers and the words just weren't resonating with our leadership. But once we put it in the customers' eyes, they really saw it. So it's a very valuable tool. So anyway, this is what's in market today, and I'll show you a little preview of where we're taking Acrobat. And again, it could run on any surface. One of the things that we're working on now at Adobe is getting away from the language of desktop, web, or mobile, and really just looking at the experience on a device that could be a touch device, could have a pen, and really sort of genericizing the language to this could run on any surface. So there's that. And then Lightroom is another one that started as a desktop application, and then we started adding in the other surfaces. And we just announced a couple of weeks ago at Adobe Max a new version of Lightroom, which is actually a sort of reimagined, but still very much in the DNA of Lightroom, but it's all cloud-centric, cloud-first, and runs across all of the surfaces. So.
Great. Did Adobe miss or come in late to the whole prototyping part of things? Adobe XD is doing well now, but I believe in the interim between Fireworks, when it kind of stopped, there's been a lot of other players who came in. What are your thoughts, and how's Adobe sort of responding to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Photoshop traditionally had been the application where people did everything. They did photo stuff, they did graphic design, they did screen design, they did 3D design. Lightroom was the first one that we said, let's make sort of a purpose-built for photography and sort of take that. We left the functionality in Photoshop, obviously, but we took that out and really wanted to focus that. This is a picture of XD, which is a similar thing. So the screen design piece, we tried to sort of shoehorn it into Adobe, went to Photoshop at one point. We had, what did we call it? Design Studio or something like that, which didn't work because when you have an older flagship product, sort of tuning it to a task-based workflow is very, very difficult. And so that's when we decided that we would focus on XD and really do a purpose-built product for prototyping and screen design. And this one in particular is very interesting because it's the first where we're actually designing it with the community of designers, and it's being obviously designed by screen designers themselves. And so tomorrow we will be having 2 different workshops, I think one in the morning, one in the afternoon. So please come and we will show you XD, and maybe some of you guys have tried the beta, yeah? It's way better than Sketch. Or will be.
Great. Another question, and this is probably on behalf of a lot of SaaS startups and a lot of startups which are doing products where it may not be the best product necessarily, but people have got used to using it. And Adobe also has similar ways. I think people have got used to using Photoshop or Illustrator or maybe some of the earlier software in certain ways. How do you introduce a new thing and get them to move away from certain ways of working on it and adopt new flows? I'm sure there will be a lot of people kind of crying out loud on social media, but how do you bring them together and get them to do something different?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a question that we're asking ourselves at Adobe as well. And one of the things that our C-level is asking us, because we have Photoshop and we have these flagship applications that, that's where Adobe's revenue is generated from. And as the design team is creating new sort of modern, lighter weight, task-based experiences, they're like, hey, wait a minute, like how are we going to move users into these new spaces and what's going to happen to Photoshop? So what we're trying to do is through the cloud, because we have the cloud, is introduce learning and ways in which to transition users over. We're also trying to keep the language and the patterns very similar across all of these. And we have several, there's other ones that we're working on that are using a similar framework to XD, but in the back you can see it's very similar. Like we still have the same tools on the side and the preferences on the right there. So we're trying to make it still feel like Adobe, but have it much more specific to the task at hand. And then by designing in the open and designing with our customer and our user, they're learning as we're building. And so that's that's a big deal for Adobe to do these in open sort of public betas. It gives us the opportunity to not go off in our corner and design and then put it out into the world, but to really iterate out in the open with our users so they're learning as we're building.